Welcome everyone, I'm Peter Myers with DDJ Myers and ALM First Company, and today we're going to be talking about the roads to becoming a CEO. This conversation, this topic, who are we talking to? We're talking to those aspiring executives, those future CEOs that are interested in becoming a CEO, leading an organization, taking up the mantle, taking up that charge. This content, it's really based inside the name. You can see it, the roads to become a CEO. People want to know, how do I get to become a CEO? What does that take? So we're going to talk through this content. We're going to talk about historic context. We're talking about some advantages and disadvantages being an internal versus an external candidate. We're going to talk about some must-haves. We're going to talk about a lot today. The context, though, I want you to take it in some generalizations. There's no surefire one road, one certainty path of how to get to become a CEO, and that's why the title is The Roads to Becoming a CEO. So a little background context on DDJ Myers. So we started as a firm in 1989 doing executive search, working with financial institutions to find those executives, find those CEOs to help their organization go to the next level. So we've been doing CEO executive search for decades, and so we have a lot of relevant experience. We also have a fair amount of experience. This is how I spend most of my time, working with C-level teams and CEOs to raise their professional offer and contribution to the organization. So we're hired by CEOs to build up the executive team, build up their internal candidates. We're hired by boards to help build up that internal talent so they have multiple options in the future. So we're in this conversation a lot. So a little background before we talk about what it takes to become a CEO tomorrow. I think it's important to understand what is the historic context of our industry and how CEOs were chosen over time. First and foremost, you got to remember that this is a heavily regulated and conservative industry. The people that are in the boards and CEOs position, they have to be informed by the constitutive and regulatory environment to say, this is how we have to run our institutions, which is very different than, I just met someone yesterday that came from blockchain and digital and Bitcoin kind of. Those individuals are very, very different than the CEOs that are leading our industry. So that's the kind of nature. I want you to just hold that in the background of your mind and as you look at CEOs of other industries. So prior to the Great Recession, let's go way back here, right? Prior to 2008, what kind of CEOs were in those positions? If I could overly generalize it, simplify it here, I'd say there's about two different categories of leaders then. Those individuals that grew up within the ranks, they built the buildings, maybe not literally, but figuratively, they were inside their institutions for long periods of time, vast and wide berth of experience. They understood how their institution ran, every nook and cranny, right? So they had that kind of experience, exposure to take their organization to the next level, build it to where it was today. And then there's this other kind of leader, another general kind of background context that they came from was maybe like the CFO type. And that is, it was a common trend for CFOs to be well positioned to become CEOs because, again, we're in a financial services industry. We do finance. That's the nature of the beast. But then there was, let's go during the Great Recession, okay? During that economic time, boards their fiduciary responsibility was the safety and soundness of their organization. And so when money and delinquencies and people were losing their jobs, all those things, boards reverted back to what they knew best, which is financial soundness. And so the people that were largely sought for the CEO positions at that time were of the finance background. And even then, I would say the CFOs that become CEOs, they largely had an accounting kind of background. They knew how to account for every single dollar and really keep the institution safe. And again, I'm providing an overgeneralization, but that was the tone and tenor of boards and what they were looking for during that time frame. And then there was we're emerging from the Great Recession, and we started looking at expansion, and boards started to see, hey, look, this is now, we're past that, the losses, we're past that. Now it's a time for expansion and looking at opportunity. So what we started to see is boards open up their eyes to say, hey, look, okay, we need to make investments in technology. And even at that point in time, it was very different technology than it was today. But boards, they thought they wanted to go into that next level. What does that take? And then also, I remember very, very vividly, bank transfer day in November 2011, where organizations are like, that's a marketing point. How do we do this? And so we started to see chief marketing officers and COOs and different people with different backgrounds coming out of that Great Recession than just a CFO. And so it started to broaden a little bit. But then, again, the fourth industrial revolution, if you don't know exactly what that term is, it's really talking about information, digital information, information everywhere, and how do we capitalize on it. So in the teens and the late teens and coming into the last couple of years, boards are really looking for those leaders that have a vision that includes a digital strategy, a robust digital and technology strategy. And so we saw a lot of CIOs that had, of course, that experience in building out in infrastructure to do those mobile and online banking strategies, etc. They became CEOs. A lot of them were sought to become CEOs. Of course, there were other individuals that were non-CIOs that were getting the CEO ranks, but that was a major requirement that we saw boards take. It's like, who has done this technology stuff before? Who has led that charge? And can they just come into our institution and replicate it overnight, right? That's a lot of the conversation we had. And then there was COVID, and then we saw, CEOs that were right at the blink to retire. They were ready to retire, and then they say, I can't leave just yet because I got to make sure we get through this thing in 2020 and make sure everyone's safe and sound. So what we found is boards were looking for a leader. They're looking for a leader to capitalize on the opportunity, to make sure our staff felt safe, and to make sure our members felt comfortable with their financial assets, etc. So they started to, over the last number of years, more hone in on what kind of leader do we want positioning our message in the marketplace. And then that's really what we're seeing a lot of today. It's less dependent on the actual operational, functional expertise, and it's more looking at the quality and character of leader that's going to have the presence, that's going to galvanize people to take their work and their contributions and raise it to the level that the organization needs for the future, because the environment is more competitive than ever, and so we need robust strategies. We need people to give it their all. Now, what about tomorrow? All right, so I just gave you high level, some generalizations over the last 20 years, what kind of characteristics that boards have been looking for. What is it going to take for us tomorrow? Are we at the turn of another change? We could be, but time will tell, right? So I'm going to give you a little recent expertise that boards have been looking at today. Our last 10 DDJ Myers' last 10 CEO placements, and what are their characteristics and what are the common threads? High level overview, there's no one, hopefully you're getting this message already, there's no one single factor besides their leadership qualities, the kind of character that shows up and leads people every single day that we can point to that says this is what boards are looking for. But because you need to know, because you want to know, you have to know that operational background. I'm going to break it down for you. So the last 10 CEO placements, and I just pulled it up here before coming in and doing this recording. Who were those last 10? Okay, so 3 of the last 10 were CFOs. They had that CFO background, they had that financial acumen, and of course they had that leadership characteristics we're talking about. 4 of the last 10 had a retail delivery concentration, but each of those 4 had what I'll call a chaser functional expertise. And so what I mean by that is they had retail operations, and one of them had also lending. Retail operations, one of them had commercial operations background, so business services, commercial lending, etc. One of them had retail and back office operations. One of them had, and the fourth of the 4 retail had strategy as their chaser expertise. So they own the strategy development and deployment for their organization. So we had 3 CFOs, 4 retail, plus a chaser expertise. That leaves 3 more. So we had one that came from risk management background. So they were a chief risk officer for a long period of time. And prior to becoming CEO, they then moved into an operations role, a COO role. But how they cut their teeth as an executive was in the risk management business. And then we had alternative revenue background. So we had QSOs, etc. So we had 3 CFOs, 4 retail with a chaser, risk management, and I'm forgetting my count here on the 4th. Basically, the attempt here, what I'm trying to produce, one was a chief lending officer. That's it. That was the 4th one. Chief lending officer right before becoming a CEO. So again, what's the functional expertise required that boards are looking for inside of a CEO today? It's varied. It's varied. It's more about the kind of leader that you are. So I'm going to talk through some other requirements, including educational requirements, talk through the pros and cons of being an internal candidate as well. So with the education requirement, this is what we get asked a lot here. Is a degree required? Well, we'll say a degree is table stakes because that demonstrates to boards, especially boards that have a lot of higher education background, it means something to them. We'll hear from boards, well, what about a master's degree? Should we require it? Should we prefer it? We'll say to them, this is our opinion based on the market, is that if you want to make a higher education, a graduate degree a requirement, you will still have a large pool of candidates because you all are very well qualified individuals. The industry produces well qualified candidates. What we will then ask boards though is, if you want to make it a requirement, do you want us, for those individuals that have the undergrad and they have a lot of great expertise and they're checking all the other boxes you're looking for, would you like us to include them in the pool of candidates that we're offering to you? Most of the time they say absolutely. Now the trend has moved more and more towards demonstration of continuing education. And so the heads up here, that is part of a path. That is a direction that boards are looking for. So make note of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of this. All right, so internal candidacy versus external candidates. What are some of the headwinds, right, that you're facing on both sides, both positions, and then also both have some tailwinds too, so have some advantages. So let's talk about those. First, let's talk about the internal candidates, okay, which is great. It may sound weird coming from someone that has expertise in executive search, that works inside of an executive search firm, that we actually love it when internal candidates get it because there's a lot of pros to it and it demonstrates leadership continuity in a kind of way. It's a feather in the CEO that's transitioning out of the role's hat. It's a feather cap, it's feather in the board's cap, etc. There's a lot of great things, but there's some cons to it too, and we want to look at them. So an advantage is, from the board's perspective, you're a known quantity. You've got lots of exposure. They've seen you, they've been in a relationship with you, they've seen you present, they've seen you talk through ideas. Maybe they know about your background. They already know about the education that you have, etc. It also can be a disadvantage too, is that you are a known quantity and they haven't maybe been wowed by you yet. Couple of years ago, they may not have seen the right exposure from you, or maybe there was a missed opportunity. Maybe there's an operation or a strategy that didn't go super well. Even if it was 10 years ago, it sticks in their mind. And that's a relevant variable to contend with. And so maybe you haven't had enough exposure. We've seen in organizations even of size, $700 million, which is not a small organization by any means, where the CEO is retiring and the board is asking the CEO, hey, are there any internal candidates? We've never even had other executives besides you and the CFO at the institution. We know, or at strategic planning. and we've only and the CFO is not interested. So who else works there? It's a rare circumstance, but it happens, right? They don't have enough exposure. Another one is you're a part of the culture, a positive thing. Overwhelmingly, boards are very proud of their institution. Credit unions do a great job, all of that, and the culture is a part of that. Most of the time, boards will say, we love our culture. We don't want our culture to change. And you've been a part of that culture as an internal candidate. That's a pro. That's an advantage you have. The other side of that, though, is sometimes boards and even certain members or factions of a board may say, look, but our culture needs to shift because our strategy needs to evolve. And those go hand in hand. And you as an internal candidate, you're a pillar. You have helped build and shape this culture. And I don't know if we want that to continue in the same kind of way. And so there's kind of a double-edged sword there. You know and continue the strategy as an advantage. You've helped, your signature is on the strategic plan as well. You help develop that content, and you're going to keep the good stuff for sure. Then there's a disadvantage. And this is a tricky spot for internal candidates because lots of times internal candidates want to keep the good stuff and they want to do a few things differently, but some board members don't know, and you can't necessarily say that prior to the CEO succession planning process. Say, hey, look, I want to do things differently because we've got to be aligned as a team. So how do you differentiate yourself from the CEO's strategy and say, hey, look, I'm going to capitalize on what we've done, but I want to do these other things differently. I want to see an opportunity here that maybe we need to reconsider and we haven't in the past. So that's a headwind that you have to face. Compensation is a major factor inside of CEO succession planning and readying for this. So internal candidates, it's very easy for boards to know, hey, how much does Juan make, right? How much is Juan making? I'm going to use round numbers here. He makes $100,000. He's our guy, so we want him. So we'll give him a 20% raise. These are real percentages I've heard from CEOs. We'll give him a nice bump. 20%. That's a nice bump, right? But yet the risk and the reward and the requirements and what's fair for that role are fundamentally different than going from an executive officer inside the organization to the CEO. And so it becomes a pro because we can give you this, and it comes a disadvantage because they know what you can make and they know what 20% is, and you'll probably take it. We've had internal candidates really want the opportunity and jump at the offer before they really consider what's fair for compensation, and then it's a fight that they have to then wage later on inside of their CEO tenureship to get up to market and what's fair. So it's both a pro and a con here, okay? Trust has been earned and proven. They've seen you, they've touched you. Trust is a huge factor inside of a CEO decision. Who do we trust? Who do we want? We've known you, we've seen you fall down and stand back up. We've seen you own mistakes. We've seen you champion things. We've seen things. We know what kind of character you are. But then we've also seen that trust has potentially been broken at certain points in time or fractured because of a comment that was made a couple of years ago that board members, they just can't let go of. And I'm not saying that they should, but it's a factor, and they need to know where you are on some things, or have you grown, have you changed. So trust is a factor, and sometimes internal candidates, they don't know that their trust has maybe been fractured at a certain point in time. So there's a way to go about that. We'll talk about it in a little bit. As an advantage, internal candidate, you are the best that they're aware of, right? Oh my gosh, Juan as an internal candidate, you are an excellent individual. You continue to bring awesome results and bring the organization to the next level, and we see you out there doing the things that we need, and we just know that you're a good guy. We know you're the right kind of candidate. But then also they may look at it as like, well, but you're the best of what we know of, right? And so is there different talent out there, and can we actually afford to get other talent out there? And maybe we could. And so that's just what's in front of them. And so that becomes a disadvantage when the skepticism starts to be there. Now let's talk about external candidates, okay? Because there's a lot of advantages and there's a lot of disadvantages too. And it's important for external candidates to understand, hey, these are the things that you're facing. And it's also important for internal candidates to understand what the factors that external candidates are facing, and vice versa, external to understand the pros and cons that internal candidates have. So the advantages are the results speak for yourself. You can just put it on the resume and you can say, hey, look at the call report. Look at how we produce. Look at the measurements that we've done. These were important in our organization. I was there from point A to point B in time, and you can see results from point A to point B. I was there. My record stands for itself. You can stand on it. That's exciting. And then also disadvantages that sometimes board members will go, yeah, okay, I see the results. I see what you did there. I don't know what exactly you were responsible for at those institutions, but maybe you had a part, maybe you didn't have a part, but can you do it here? I don't know. Can you actually do it here? I don't know if you can. And so there's a certain skepticism, I'll say healthy at times, that board members will have of external candidates. An advantage is, new leadership, especially in the CEO position, the culture is going to change. And if the energy you're bringing, it might refresh the culture. We might give it a boost, right? As I said earlier, a lot of boards are really proud of their culture, and that doesn't mean that cultures can't continue to evolve and can't use a booster shot. And so that's where external candidates can come in. They bring fresh energy and perspective on this. But then also, on the disadvantage side is the culture, if we want to protect it as a board, they might be worried that it might be too drastic of a change for their organization. And we've done so well as a credit union, and we want to make sure that culture is, the culture is sustained because the culture provided that expertise, provided that success. And so they're looking at that as well. Fresh ideas and strategic content. One of the great things about being an external candidate is you get to capitalize on what the institution has already been doing, right? Those daily operations and those strategic decisions, you get to capitalize on that. But then also you bring different decisions and perspective, and you get to supplant it immediately, right? Fresh ideas and content, boom. We can do the best of both worlds here. But then also, external candidates, the boards will want to know, hey, look, we don't want you to mess up what we've been doing. So what is your vision? What is your plan? Exactly. And so this is where external candidates have the challenge to provide that vision to the board through the interviewing process and and share with them, these are the things on the ground that I'm planning on landing, right? These things, these blocks of actions and resource allocation based on what I know right now. And I'm going to reserve the right to change my mind once we get in there and we start turning over rocks, etc. But this is my plan. This is where I want to go. So boards want to know exactly what you're thinking to the degree that's appropriate in the interview process. So as an external candidate, you have access to other talent. Hey, where I want to go with this institution, this digital strategy, and what we've done before as an example. I know who to resource. I know who to call. I know the strategic partners. We want to do awesome strategic planning and build out strategic capabilities inside the organization. I'm going to call DDJ Myers because I worked with them before and they're awesome, especially that guy, Peter. He's funny and he's talented. All those things, right? So that can be a resource, right? Immediately. But then also, it can play against you as well because the board will want to make sure that the executive team, this happens a lot where boards will say, hey, look, you run the organization, but, we're concerned about the executive team. Are you going to keep them? I'm going to tell you, over the years that we've been doing this, only two instances I can think of where the external candidate came in and did have to change over the executive team because the organization was heading in the wrong direction, and the board agreed and supported that. Another way to say that is, largely, it is a concern that boards have. It's even a concern of external executive staff in the institution. Are they going to change over? Are they going to bring over their own team? Overwhelming majority of the time, it does not happen. But they're concerned. They're concerned about it. So you want to pay attention to that. Compensation is focused on the role. So as an external candidate, the compensation is what it is for the role. This is the benchmark. This is the philosophy. It's there. You get to know it. You get to understand that. That's there. You don't have to work that. It doesn't matter what you made yesterday. It's very, very different times in compensation today, and we've got a whole other webinar on compensation at the end of this session here that you can click through. So it's there. But then also a disadvantage is your compensation may be very different than what the prior CEO was making. Many a times there are CEOs that have been in the position for 10, 20 years, and so their compensation was annually adjusted 3-4%, even though the institution had grown substantially, and now they're underpaid because, hey, they're fair, I'm not worried about it, I'm well taken care of, and that's all noble. But what ends up happening at times is board members will go, gosh, that's what CEOs are making for this size organization today. Oh my gosh, we're going to have to right size all this, and then we're going to have to right size the executive team. You know what? We don't need that. We don't need that high quality external talent. Let's just go with the internal person because we can, it'll be an easier grade. That does happen. Compensation is a very large factor inside of CEO searches. All right, so the advantages of external candidate trust is given, right? So you've proven yourself, you get fresh ideas, you're so excited, you're going to enliven the culture. We have to give you all the keys to the castle in order for you to be effective in your role. We have to give it to you. But then also, for some board members, trust is earned. Trust is earned. And I'll give you an example. It's not only one time, it's a number of times where we're starting a CEO search and we sit with the board, and one of the questions we ask them to kind of gut check them about what they're after is, hey, how is trust, for you? Is trust, are the external candidates, are they coming in with a full bucket of trust, or are they coming in where they got to earn the trust? And it's very quickly you'll hear half the board go, well, yeah, they're coming in with a full bucket of trust, obviously. Look, they've proven themselves, they're being vetted by you, all those kinds of things. And the other half of the board, at the same time, will say, no, trust is earned. We got to make sure that they're the right person. We have to, and then the board members will look across the table at each other. Well, what? What'd you say? I thought you said the same thing. So in other words, you have to work through that conversation. That it's actually both, right? It's not either or. It's actually both. And so the trust is granted. And the other way to say that is, as an external candidate, you want to recognize that for some board members, they want to know what you're doing at certain junctures. And so one of the counsels that we have in our succession planning process and our thorough onboarding processes to advise CEOs to have an elevated level of transparency for the first bit of their CEO tenure to make sure they're taking care of both of those board audiences. All right, last but certainly not least, and this is probably the most important line out of both of these slides here, okay, on both of them, is that as an external candidate, you're the cream of the crop. I mean, as an executive search firm, we are charged with knowing the talent that's out there before the board even commissions us for a search. We have to know what is out there. We have to have our finger on the pulse. Who's doing well, who's not doing well. So we're going to NAFCU conferences, we're meeting people, we're understanding, we're looking at call reports. We have to know that. And then when we get commissioned for a board, for a search, and what are you looking for? And we start to go through that whole process, we get to then go to the market and pick the cream of the crop. As a disadvantage, sometimes there are exceptional internal candidates. Of course there are. And so what starts to happen is, in a board member's perspective, is, look, so-and-so is bringing more to the table, external candidate, more to the table than our internal candidate. But you know what? Our internal candidate is only marginally not as great. And so you know what? We have to weigh the cultural changes, the impact, the compensation, all these things that we listed earlier, just for marginal difference, right? So that's a factor to pay attention to. All right, so what can you do now? Okay, what can you do now? Given everything I just laid out, and again, this is a complex topic, and I'm given a time limit here. I got to give this to you in about 20-something minutes. So there's a lot to unpack, but I'm hopefully giving you a certain amount. I'm going to give you some action items here to start checking the box on to get yourself in a better, more prepared position here, okay? So continue formal education. If you haven't had that undergrad degree, it's going to be very, very challenging to become a CEO without that. So get that formal education. If you're considering having a graduate degree, Look at that plan. Look at that timeline. Look at your career. If you had that, it puts you in a competitive advantage there. And at certain organizations, it's a go, no go kind of factor. You will not pass go without that. If you're not having the time, interested to get that graduate degree, look for other continuing education. Involve yourself in other kinds of going to NAFQ conferences, getting these certifications, staying up on the trends. Look for ways to demonstrate that you are invested in growing yourself as an individual, formally and informally, okay? Build a network, all right? So there are network out there and we're better together, right? That is easy to understand. It's easy to preach. Those that do it well have better ideas, they have new ideas, and they infuse them into their organization, and they become a resource to other people. I can't tell you how much it sticks in board members' minds when a CEO candidate says, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, and I know this person, I know these things, and I've leveraged these people, and we've worked this together. Absolutely. Not only do I get to come in, you get me as a candidate, but you get my network and my resources, my relationships in the credit union industry as well. It is a huge advantage. All right, here's a big one here. Set a new bar for strategic content. So if you're an internal candidate, and you're eyeing at that CEO position, or you want to be a contender, a strong contender in the future for that position, what I want you to think about is setting the bar. Take advantage of building out and furthering our strategic planning process. Make it more longitudinal, make it more robust, make it more comprehensive. Act as if you were solely accountable for the whole strategic plan, and having those concepts drop down into the management and staff team. That's setting a new bar. Present very robust, complicated content in front of the board. If you don't have a shot as an internal candidate, or maybe you want to go elsewhere, still do all those same things. Set the bar for strategic discipline inside your organization so you can then confidently and accurately tell another organization, hey, this is how we run strategic planning. This is my contribution to the strategic planning efforts at our organization. Set that bar. Write that content out. Present that content. That's such a big one, because an interview is really a presentation, and you'll see some of that in some of the continuing education content we'll have at the end of this webinar here. Demonstrate financial acumen. All right. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, you have financial acumen. You're an executive in a financial institution. Well, if you don't talk about the financial variables that are a part of the economic engine of your institution, if you don't have a strong and demonstrated display of those skills and concepts, it will put you at a competitive disadvantage. Another way to say what I'm saying is, sometimes some executives with great functional expertise don't have a demonstrated or even realized mastery of those concepts, and board members can pick it up. Because remember that historic context I gave you earlier? Safety, soundness, financials, all that. That's the bedrock of our institution, our industry. They need to know you know those things beyond growth and marketing and all those things. They need to know that you have a strong grasp of those fundamental principles. So this is a big one here. We want you to think about it like this, that before you are really submitting yourself to be a CEO contender, start to engage your daily life as if you were a CEO, and look at your organization, look at your life in and outside of work through the lens of being a CEO. Are you ready to take that responsibility? Can you see the operations through a broader perspective and not just your functional areas? That is a huge a variable here, and that's what we're also looking for on the executive search side. Are you looking at the organization, the industry, as if you were already a CEO already, as opposed to just your functional expertise? If you're really interested, it's important to get a CEO readiness assessment. Get an outside expert opinion to say, how competitive am I as a candidate? Would you place me in this size institution with this kind of economic variables and this kind of strategies? How competitive would I be? And that's something that can happen. That's something you have to go outside with. Don't necessarily believe your own headlines, right? You want to get outside expertise opinion. This is a good one here. So have confidence in what you know and feel comfortable in not knowing everything. What we have seen at times is CEO candidates that want to demonstrate to boards, I'm your guy, I'm your leader, I'm your next CEO. And then there are certain things that they don't know. We're all human, we're not machines, we don't have to know everything. And then they'll try and glaze it in a certain kind of way. They'll try and paint the canary red, right? And the boards, they can sniff through that. And so it's okay if you say, hey, look, this is my expertise and this area is not my expertise. But you know what I have? I got resources. I know the people that there. And you know what? I've been continuing my education in these kinds of ways to become more familiar with it so that I can know when we're on and off track. And you know what? We're going to develop their team in order to take care of that aspect of the organization. So have confidence in what you know and comfort in not knowing everything. So understand what the board is looking for. Okay, I'm going to encapsulate this in a brief story. So one time we're doing a CEO search and a candidate called me, and one of the first things he said was, hey, you know what, I am the best, Peter's your lucky day. I'm the best candidate. I'm the most qualified candidate that you're going to have for this organization and what this organization needs. This individual did not even ask me one question about what the organization needs and what the board is looking for. And it's a dramatic example, but you want to make sure that you understand what that board and that organization needs, because not all CEO positions are created equal. They're all different. And that's great, because if they were all the same, then there would be one road in order to becoming CEO, right? So understand what that board is looking for, and you don't have to go after every opportunity. In fact, I don't recommend that, right? Make sure you find the right fit, because you want to be successful as a CEO. The outcome that you should be looking for is not becoming a CEO. The outcome you should be looking for is becoming a successful CEO. So this goes to say, here's one of my favorite sayings we do in our leadership program: stop living as a legend in your own mind, right? This is, hey, look, you bring a lot to the table, but there are certain things you got to get better at. Everyone has to get better as a leader. What are those aspects of it? And so if we only read our own headlines, we're not going to read the subtext, right? So we want to take our executive leadership, our executive presence, the competencies that we have, we want to take it to the next level, because you know what? CEOs are hiring a person. They're not hiring just your background. They're hiring the kind of character that's going to continue to grow and learn as a CEO. And so it's important that you demonstrate that leadership, that kind of leadership characteristics. All right, so final thoughts here. There is a lot of ways to becoming a CEO, and hopefully that inspires a certain level of confidence and inspiration in you to say, hey, look, it could be me. It could be me. And so therefore, I'm going to map out my development plan. I'm going to take my leadership skills, the effectiveness of my content. I'm going to tackle some big strategic conversations over the next years so I can demonstrate that kind of aptitude and be ready for the next CEO position. There's not one way to get there. It's more about the leadership characteristics that we have. And stay tuned to what's happening in the climate tomorrow and keeping up on those skills. So as promised here, there's a couple of continuing education pieces here, a couple of podcasts here. If you're ready to be a CEO at a show and how to land a CEO interview, and Presentations Matter is a great article on this here. And then also we've got CEO performance and compensation. I did a great podcast, Shifting Your Management from Leadership. I'm saying great because we got a lot of great reviews on it. So keep going this. There's a couple of webinars on CEO succession planning. These are based on some research we did with NAFU a couple of years ago. Those trends are still important to pay attention to. And then, of course, a few more CEO readiness pieces here in succession planning. Hopefully you enjoyed this content. Hopefully you got some of these generalizations and these stories and these examples. You got some good nuggets, some actionable content to go to the next level. Again, I'm Peter Myers with DDJ Myers. We're an ALM First company. Good luck.